IVM.
The Supreme Court is in the news pretty much every single day. And if you pick up the state page of any newspaper, you're sure to find a mention of the state high court every other day. But whatever you hear about is the tip of the iceberg. Millions of cases enter India's lower judiciary every year, and it is these city and district courts that are dispensing justice to Indians most in need of it. How well does the subordinate judiciary work? What kind of cases do they spend time on? And how can these local courts be reformed to provide better and faster judgments for those most desperately in need? Surya Prakash joins me on this episode to help us understand about all this and more. Welcome to the Pragati Podcast, a weekly talk show on public policy, economics and international relations. I'm your host, Pavan Srinath. Surya Prakash BS is a fellow and program director at Daksh, a Bengaluru-based think tank focused on judicial reforms in India and to enable speedy delivery of justice for all. Surya is also my good friend and hosts the Thale-Harate Kannada Podcast along with me and Ganesh Chakravarthi. We'll start our conversation with Surya after a short break.
Hey everybody, you know what we've got? We've got another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So if you haven't been following us on YouTube, please do a search for IVM CCTV and get a peek inside what's going on in the studio. You can see excerpts from Cyrus Says, Naveen from Keeping It Queer, Akash from Varta Lab. There's stuff that we've done with Feeding 10 Billion. There are a whole bunch of little videos over there. Give it a watch and let us know what you think about that. On the scene and the unseen, Amit Verma is joined by journalists Barun Mitra and Kumar Anand to discuss the crisis in agriculture. On Agla Station Adulthood, hosts Ayushi and Ritasha discuss various interpretations of beauty and also share some amazing skincare routines. On Feeding 10 Billion, Ramya and Varun talk to Dr. Sandhya Sriram of Shiok Meats about bringing cell-based shrimp to our restaurants. On 9XM Soundcast, Eva is joined by the incredible music composer duo Vishal and Shekhar. They talk about the process of creating a soundtrack and give their views about the remix trend in Bollywood. On the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, Ashwin and DJ conclude the Ashes and talk about the failure of Indian middle order in the T20s. On the Kinetic Living Podcast, Coach Urmi shares a workout called Arc Planks on Tabata Tuesdays. On Thriving Thursdays, she shares a journey towards building kinetic living and the challenges that she faced. On Varta Lab, Akash and Naveen are joined by Shashwat Bulusu, a singer-songwriter from Baroda who is pushing the sonic aesthetic of guitar-centric laid-back pop. On Geek Fruit, Dinkar and Jishnu talk about pop culture that revolves around the apocalypse and tell us how they would ideally prepare for it. On Football Shutball, hosts Gaurav, Karthik and Siva bring to you the post-match reactions of their favorite fixture of the year, Manchester United versus Arsenal. That's no surprise to anybody. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Hi Surya, welcome to the Pragati Podcast. Surya, we get together here in the studio all the time to record episodes of Thale-Harate, but it's great to have this conversation in English with you today.
Hi Pavan, I almost started off in Kannada as is our habit.
So it's like muscle memory when you're in the studio. So Surya, today we wanted to talk about India's so-called lower judiciary or even subordinate judiciary. And these are basically district and city level courts, right? The first place where most Indians go to seek, legal recourse or seek justice. First of all, the name itself is problematic,
strange,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about government, we talk about union, state and local. But here it's subordinate, lower.
Correct.
The problem seems to start with the name itself.
Absolutely. I think scholar Upendra Bakshi first made this point about how the subordinate courts, subordinate judiciary is a misnomer. Really, it should not be called so. Because each judge is an independent decision maker, right, giving justice in his own domain. So the appropriate term would probably be district judiciary.
Right.
Or trial courts. Some of them are also called trial courts. As you said, that is really the first point of contact for the citizens. If you're arrested for breaking the traffic rules, you go to the local magistrate court. There are special courts for dealing with traffic crimes. If you get arrested for a Facebook post, for example, right, you land up at the magistrate court. That is where your bails are disposed of, etc. Similarly, if you have a land dispute, right, encroachment,
right,
you land up at the local courts. If you go to a tax dispute, if you have not filed your returns and the authorities proceed against you and you still have a problem, you go to the income tax tribunal. Similarly with GST, right? So the word subordinate judiciary traditionally refers to the courts that are below the high courts.
Okay.
In our mind, we see the subordinate judiciary as one monolithic institution. Actually, there is a hierarchy within the subordinate judiciary at a district level. So there is a munsif, who is the first port of call at the rural places, most of the rural places.
Okay.
Here I would like to draw a distinction between the rural court structure and the urban court structure.
Okay, so along with sort of urbanization, 74th Amendment, all of that, there was also a parallel separation between how our courts have functioned.
So that's a very interesting topic. Our urban judicial infrastructure is a vestige of, like much of the judiciary, is a colonial vestige.
Okay.
Right? So the most of the courts that were set up by the British were in the presidencies.
Right.
So your Bombay, Madras, Calcutta, Shimla, because it was once a capital, right? There was these presidency courts, and they had their own structure, which evolved into what is now known as metropolitan magistrate courts.
Okay.
Right? So that model has now been expanded other capital cities and important, urban centers.
Right.
So there is a distinction between metropolitan magistrate courts, metropolitan courts, and the normal district judiciary, what is known as the district and sessions judges.
Okay.
So that's the distinction there. But within those, even within the metropolitan courts and the district and sessions, under them, there is a munsif, there is a senior division court, a hierarchy.
Okay.
Now, this hierarchy does not mean that every case goes through the entire hierarchy.
Right.
There is a pecuniary jurisdiction. That means to say, if it's disputes below 10,000, you go to a senior civil division. Just as an example. It may be different in different jurisdictions.
So this is especially for civil
cases. Criminal too, heinous crimes like attempt to murder, rape, these go directly to the highest criminal court of that jurisdiction, which is either the district and sessions judge or the metropolitan magistrate courts.
Okay.
So there is a hierarchy in criminal matters too.
Right.
So it is not a pyramid as such. It is depending on the dispute, and that is especially a problem when you want to map it and say something that we at Daksh, it's trying to do is how long does a case get for it to be really, disposed of from the system.
Right.
For that, you need to understand where does the case start from. Does it go, if you have hierarchy A1, B1, C1, D1, does it really have to go through all the levels is a question that is different for each jurisdiction. Right. Mostly it is a statewide change. Apart from the district judiciary, there are the tribunals.
Right.
Now, tribunals.
So just to clarify on the district judiciary, so you're saying while there are these hierarchies, typically cases go only to one level of that hierarchy.
There may be one more within before they reach the High Court.
Right. So will that higher level be on appeal or as a part of the natural process itself?
It will be an appeal.
Okay.
Some of the crimes need to automatically go to the next court because it's a punishment, it's a liberty issue, and it needs to be confirmed.
Right.
So some of them will have to be naturally gone through the process of appeal. For example, death penalty, clearly, irrespective of what happens, the High Court has to have a look at it.
Right.
But even apart from that, some cases go directly to the High Court, not from the highest court within the subordinate judiciary, but a level below that also it can go to the High Court. And
of course, when we talk about any constitutional matters, it has to go to the Supreme Court.
It first starts with the High Court.
Okay.
Right.
So constitutional matters don't even go to the subordinate judiciary.
Absolutely right.
Okay.
So the PIL, right, all the PILs that we see for garbage, for lakes, all of those river pollution, those to first start, many of them start at the National Green Tribunal. Those are not PILs, right? Those are cases against authorities for not proceeding or not acting within the things. Some of them will end up being PILs because it has not been handled properly or as an appeal.
Right. So now coming to tribunals. So while we have these notional three levels from sort of the union to the local, this is like a parallel infrastructure that is specialized. Right?
Correct. So people increasingly felt that some of the subject matters required domain knowledge for it to be solved. It could be securities laws, which is why you have a securities appellate tribunal. It could be foreign exchange. It could be company law, which is why you have the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. It could be tax. It could be environmental law.
Right.
These have been set up by the executive, which is the government, and says, you know what, these type of cases we will handle separately. It did not go into the district judiciary. We will have people from subject matters from the executive. It will also have, it needs to have, after the Madras Bar Association case, it needs to have a representative of the judiciary.
Okay.
In equal number. In the recent case of the GST Appellate Tribunal, that matter was recently given by the Madras High Court, where the executive numbers were more than the judicial numbers.
Okay.
So there were two executive members on the bench versus one from the judiciary. They said, no, it can't be. If it has to be a tribunal which is going to hear cases that would otherwise have gone to the subordinate judiciary, it needs to be equal.
Right.
A very important feature.
So help me understand that a little better. So when we are talking about these tribunals, say there's a tax tribunal. So therefore, if there is a income tax dispute between a company or an individual and the government saying you need to pay 30 lakhs income tax, I say no, I only need to pay 15 lakhs income tax. You go to this tribunal.
Correct.
Right? So who will be sitting there? So there'll be some judge, some judicial appointee, and there'll also be somebody from the Central Board for Direct Taxes or something like that?
So they are, in the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, they are known as an accountant member and a judicial member. Right? Judicial member are persons from a legal background.
Okay.
Accountant members are either CAs in practice or departmental officers who together form this bench. It is known as a bench.
Okay.
Right? So they will be hearing your cases.
Right. So how is conflict of interest managed in that case? What if you're fighting with the executive, right? You're fighting with the Central Board of Direct Taxes, saying that I disagree with your tax assessment.
Right. So that varies from tribunal to tribunal.
Okay.
Now, in the case of Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, which is the first tribunal set up in the country, and just a few years back completed 75 years of its existence, there's a career for these bench members. That means to say, throughout, once you join the Appellate Tribunal as a member, you can retire from that.
Like a judge?
Like a judge.
Okay. So that confers some notional independence to this.
That is not the case with many state tribunals.
Okay.
For example, there are land tribunals. There were sales tax tribunals, right? So departmental members, sales tax department officers used to sit on the bench and then after some years go back to the department.
Okay.
Right? Judicial members also used to sit here and then go back to the judiciary. There definitely needs to be a case for career judges for the tribunals. The larger question which some people say is, tribunals should not even exist. It should all be handled by the judiciary if you really are looking for independence. But we should tackle that in a separate podcast.
Fair enough. We also had an earlier episode on the Pragati Podcast where we talked about, I think, environmental law and the NGT with Ninad Lord. And even he was saying in the NGT, it is the idea of there's a judge and there's somebody who's technically qualified to deal with the issues around environment, industries, development and other things, right? And he was saying how there was a preference for, say, retired IAS officers and people who have had some government experience.
Correct.
And perhaps a minority of people who are coming from outside of the government but have some experience in this. Is that broadly the case elsewhere too in other tribunals? There is a preference for government or ex-government officials?
Where the tribunal rules allow for retired executives to be nominated or appointed to the board, that is definitely the case.
Okay.
But not all tribunals operate that way.
Right.
There are, it's even more so because people who are currently within their tenure are sometimes posted to sit on the bench.
Okay.
So the conflict even gets exacerbated a bit more.
But no matter what, once there is a decision taken in a tribunal, you can appeal it in a high court, right?
Absolutely. So the appeal from the tribunal lies to the high court. So there are some exceptions, like, for example, the Securities Appellate Tribunal or the NGT, where the appeal lies to the Supreme Court directly.
Okay.
Yeah, so
but there is always an appeal. There is no tribunal where there is no appeal beyond the tribunal.
That does not exist. Only the Supreme Court has that.
So in that sense, the judiciary is still out on top.
Those checks and balances have been put in place.
Right. Okay. So now tell me a little more about how these, the subordinate judiciary, the district courts function. So you said that there was an internal hierarchy.
Right.
But give us a sense of, who... decides what and how things work generally?
Right. Now, the judges in the district courts are appointed by way of an examination. Right?
Okay.
I want to make this distinction because to the High Court and the Supreme Court, they are generally nominated.
Right.
And the collegium appoints them. These are either people who have been practicing in that High Court,
Right.
or from the lower judiciary.
Okay.
District and sessions judges get appointed to the High Courts, which is not many, but there are there. In the case of the subordinate judiciary, they have to write an exam, right? So it varies from state to state. But generally, the lowest level of judiciary, the munsif level, you need to have at least 2 to 3 years of practice experience after qualifying to write that examination. After 6 to 7 years of experience, either within the judiciary or as a lawyer practicing in that, you can then appear for the next level of examination.
That's
so
right.
there is, when the lateral entry debate was going on, I made this point in my piece that lateral entry already exists in the
It's the
judiciary.
default.
By design, it is
Right.
there because you're always incorporating lawyers who are practicing in those courts into the justice system.
And not just incorporating lawyers, but also doing so at multiple levels.
At
right?
multiple
it's
levels.
not like you have one UPSC
Correct.
where you take someone and then they have to climb through the system.
Absolutely.
But you can practice law for longer
Correct.
as a lawyer and then directly get
Absolutely,
in.
right.
Okay.
Now, in spite of that, the point needs to be made that staff from the judges at the district courts do not have a clear career progression beyond the subordinate judiciary.
Okay. So what would be the highest level a judge can achieve within the, say, a district court or
It's a
city
district and
court?
sessions judge.
Okay.
He is known as a district and sessions judge. He can sometimes become the principal district and sessions judge, who is the highest administrative in charge for a district.
Right.
Now, the reason why I said there is no career progression in mind is because the number of people who get appointed from the district judiciary to the high courts is 30 to 40% maximum.
Okay.
Right? So the lawyers who practice in the high courts are the ones who get more chance to become high court judges.
Right.
This ratio becomes even more skewed at the Supreme Court, where it's almost 80% of the Supreme Court judges have been lawyers. They have not come from the subordinate judiciary.
Okay, so it's a case of sort of extreme lateral entry in a weird way then, right?
Absolutely.
That you're not preferring people who are in the system already, who have dedicated, who
Their
probably
career.
sacrificed a lot of income and many
Correct.
other things, right?
Very much.
And how does it work? So once you are, say, a sessions judge or something, can you leave that position and get back to being a lawyer? Or is it a one-way gate?
No, people have done that. It is not common, but there have been cases of people resigning from judicial service to become get back to lawyers.
Okay. So it's not like a lifetime appointment or something.
It is, but it's a choice that people make.
Fair enough. So very similar to then the UPSC and IS system,
True,
right?
very
People
much.
typically
Yeah, right.
work till retirement, but
Correct.
there can be people who leave. All right.
The tribunals too, members from the tribunals too are eligible to become high court judges.
Okay.
Yeah. A few cases have been there of judicial members on tribunal benches going on to become high court judges. So they are eligible for to become high court judges. Now,
So these are the judges, right? And often I feel like just like there's a lot of emphasis on what's happening in the Supreme Court, there's often a lot of emphasis on who are the judges and how are they selected, how are they trained, how are they appointed.
Right.
But what about everyone else who makes a court work?
Correct.
Who are the essential cogs?
absolutely. That's been our focus at Daksh too, to see that, the example that we give is like a judge is a surgeon, right? He is a specialized skill.
Right.
He is extremely important to the society. So when a surgeon goes into an operating theatre, right, he needs to just make that incision, make that stitch, make that on-the-spot assessment. Before he comes in, before he walks in, the entire team has to prep him and the patient and the environment for that particular moment.
Right.
Therefore, the judge's position is important, but the support staff are even more important. The judges' staff are known as registries in the high courts.
Okay.
They're known as non-judicial staff at the subordinate judiciary.
Okay.
The subordinate judiciary's support staff quality has been a matter of concern for some time. The judges themselves have told that, we are lacking in stenographers, we are lacking in people who can serve notices and summons. So there is generally quality issue, but even more so, the vacancy issue.
Okay.
So recently, Daksh and Vidhi of Bangalore conducted a survey and a study of Bangalore rural courts.
Right.
And we found that there is a vacancy of almost 50% at the Bangalore rural courts for support staff.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, 50%, in some levels, it is almost 70%.
So it means that even if you have 100% occupancy of all judges and so on,
correct,
they don't have support staff, they can't do their job. Right?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Some of the support staff are shared between 3 to 4 judges, and there's enormous pressure that is put on them. Now, what is really the problem is, as the judiciary progresses, there is upskilling required. There is technology has made some positions redundant. So maybe some positions need not be filled up, and naturally they have been left vacant. For example, with dictaphones coming in and speech-to-text software coming in, maybe stenographers are not so much required.
Right.
You have something known as a position as a judgment writer who can just review the first draft of the judge and then make those changes. So clearly there are some positions that need not be filled and there is a review required. But even then, 50 to 60% vacancy is a huge number that needs revision. These appointments are made in Karnataka by the KPSC, Karnataka Public Service Commission.
Right.
So there is an exam that is conducted for all government positions, of which judiciary is one. Right. So people pass the exam and then they choose which stream they have to go to.
Right. So this is everything from sort of a village accountant, a Gram Panchayat accountant to the judiciary and more.
Correct. So the pool of people who are interested in this are people who are interested in government service.
Right.
So at the filtering level itself, at that stage itself, you're choosing people who are interested in these functions of the executive. Right. So there is, I think, a clear case to be made for separating the process of choosing the support staff.
It's like doing recruitment for army and the police together.
Right? That's a very good example. That's a great example, Pavan. Now, because justice system is a separate wing of the democracy, it's much more than pushing files or passing memos around, right? You need to have a mindset to ensure justice is rendered to the citizens. So people who are inspired... So
there's an even greater service mindset than perhaps in the executive.
Correct. Possibly, in my view, the highest function of the state is to ensure justice.
Absolutely.
So the people who come to that kind of... that wing needs to be even more inspired than the other wings of the state.
But you said that, the KPSC in Karnataka is the way to do this. And the KPSC has been... Notorious and not in action for a while now, right? Because
clearly, that's one of the reasons for vacancy, which is what we found. It varies from states.
For people who are not in Karnataka, KPSC and perhaps many state local recruitment systems have been extremely compromised, right? So there have been lots of corruption scandals, and while whatever criticism we may have of the IAS and all the cadre systems in the country, the UPSC as an institution has by and large had maintained a lot of integrity.
Correct.
While you can still critique its processes and so on. So in this case, is recruitment then at the lowest level just a big problem in a state like Karnataka? Is there an alternative to hire people? Because it's not like you can't have any staff hired for the last 5 years or something, right?
No, I wouldn't say the KPSC problem is one of the problems. Because in other states where the High Court committees themselves do the selection process, it's not that the staff are significantly better or the vacancy is any better, right? So the way the judiciary is equipped to handle its staffing function is something that needs a complete overhaul in this time. Vacancy, quality, skills, all of these are things that the interview process, it's very heavily dependent on interview process, and a lot of petitions have been filed alleging, biases in the interview process.
Right.
When TCS can conduct an exam for so many people, and it is seen to be so, objective, can't those best practices be incorporated in a public institution as critical as the judiciary?
Right.
Clearly, the judiciary needs to open up to best practices from the private sector for its staffing function.
And a lot of this is is managerial, right? I mean,
Clearly.
you need to manage the flow of cases. You need to manage to ensure that certain targets are met, to ensure that cases get disposed in a timely manner, nothing stays pending for too long, right?
Very administrative, very managerial. That does not have to compromise its independence. A lot of the pushback on appointments, on staffing is saying, oh, you're stepping into independence, right? Just leave us alone. Give me space, right? Give me space. And that I don't think works anymore. The judiciary clearly needs to step up and say, we are going to change the way we hire staff at every level.
Surya, in all this, so we are talking about, functionaries, functions, but there's also funding, right? So I know that as a part of the budget, there's a separate sort of budget when the government passes anything related to the judiciary, right? Because technically the legislature cannot have control over the funds that go to the judiciary. So it's sort of, there's a nominal thing, right? I mean, it's not necessarily voted on, but it's passed in the budget. It's a charge on the consolidated fund. On the consolidated fund. So in this case, when we're talking about hiring more people or changing how a court system is administered, the funding still has to come from the state government, right? How does that work? I know that the salaries of judges and so on is not something that can be interfered with directly by a state government. But what can the state government do and what can't the state government do?
So there are two parts to it. The funding for the judiciary, it is important to remember that the charge and the vote difference that you pointed out is only for the salaries of High Court judges and the Supreme Court judges.
Okay, so only that is charged.
Only that is the only charged portion. Okay. The other infrastructure and operational expenses are still voted upon.
Right.
Although, in practice, from whatever we have discussed with the High Court staff and the ministry staff, there is very little pushback on what the judiciary asks.
Okay.
So the judiciary asks for 100 many times. Most states just give 100. The problem comes in how does the judiciary arrive at 100? How did they plan that they need 100 and not 150 or 125?
Right.
So that the capacity of the judiciary to estimate how much they need for what line items they need is an important aspect of the functioning of the judiciary. Many people we have spoken to have said that usually they do last year plus 10 to 15%.
Right.
So,
and while that can be done even in a lot of government departments, usually it's last year plus 10% or something like that. But there are bureaucratic incentives for you to increase the budget of your department, right? For better or worse. And so therefore there is always this drive to say, I will build more, I will do more, I'll expand my mandate in a lot of government departments. That natural sort of incentive is far weaker in the judiciary, right? Because you're a judge, but you also have an admin role, but your primary role is to be a judge and perhaps manage even a group of judges under you. So when we're talking about capacity also, how do we start thinking about that?
That's a very important point because you can say, I will build more roads or I will build more bridges. But how long will you keep saying, I will build more courts?
Right.
So you could say, I will build better court halls. I will have better infrastructure, the establishment infrastructure. But to say, I will hire more people means what? What is the outcome that you are planning for? To say that, to justify your increase in budget. And that may be the reason why people have just gone for a baseline plus 10%, 15%.
Right. And when you want to build a new building, that's easy to pass
capex.
Through.
Separately, that has been a problem, separate discussion.
Right.
Now, envisioning a judiciary which has some targets in mind is also problematic because you want justice to play out its natural course, both parties given adequate chances under the present precedents and the judicial framework. So targets for disposal are also problematic.
Right.
So what should therefore be a vision for the judiciary, say over 2 years or 5 years? I think that's something that we have not given much thought to as a country, as a society. And that's something Daksh you will hear more from me on that topic.
All right. On that note, Surya, thank you so much for coming in to talk today about India's district courts on this episode. We'll take a quick break and I'll be right back.
Hi listeners, we at Aditya Birla Sun Life Mutual Fund have come up with a special podcast series called MF 101 in collaboration with Bloomberg Quint. MF 101 is an informative series that will help you understand the recipe behind mutual fund investments. And what's more, it's coming from the chefs of the mutual fund buffet table, from the very own fund managers and analysts who are the manufacturers of the funds that help you realize your investment goals. New episodes out every Monday. You can listen to the show on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Dear listeners, usually now the Pragati Podcast episodes last roughly about an hour or a little more. Today we are trying out a shorter episode where Surya came and set the stage and spoke to us about how India's subordinate judiciary works. And what we would have done in a usual episode is that we would have gone on for a second half where we would have explored the Bangalore study by Surya and his colleagues in detail, discussed reform options and a lot more. But today we are trying something a little different. Instead of a full second half which doubles the length of the episode, I'm giving you a quick teaser of what to expect from the study, and I'm really looking forward for your feedback on what you think of the length and the format of our episodes and what would make for a better listening experience. As a teaser for the study of the Bangalore rural courts by Daksh and Vidhi Karnataka that Surya mentioned in the first half, I want to say that they explore the litigation landscape of peri-urban areas surrounding the city of Bangalore. A few things that stand out here is that there is a messy jurisdictional issue when you have separate metropolitan courts for the city of Bangalore and a separate district court for the surrounding rural areas. It's particularly messy when a city like Bangalore is rapidly expanding, where what was once rural is today fundamentally urban. And in that sense, the cases that are captured in this study is perhaps reflective of the cases that we will find in peri-urban areas around any major metro in the country, from Delhi to Mumbai to Chennai to other places. So in that sense, while this is one study located in Bangalore, it might be reflective of a lot more. Having said all this about the messy jurisdictional issues, apparently for all practicing lawyers, it is common knowledge as to where to go for what case and when, and how to find the appropriate court. The same knowledge might actually be more confusing on the administrative side, but the lawyers seem to know where to go to do what they need to. In this study, with so many cases stuck in court, they found that land acquisition cases have been stuck for the longest in district courts, with the average time for a land acquisition case being 6.5 years before getting disposed. Apparently, some of this is because of a pending clarification by the Supreme Court on a related matter, which has kept many cases in limbo. Further, they found that an inordinate number of criminal and other cases are stuck at the summons stage, where cases cannot even proceed if they cannot get the accused to come to court. This is an area where backbone tech infrastructure could play a vital role in reducing the amount of friction that is there in order to get summons to go out and get people to come to the court. There have been explorations on how to do this on email, on WhatsApp, and various electronic means, which need to slowly start getting adopted and implemented. And finally, the study finds that the courts have a whopping 57% vacancies in administrative positions. Now, some of this administrative staff that a court needs may no longer be necessary with the induction of new technology, which simplifies a lot of matters. But nevertheless, you need a lot of support staff for a judge to do his or her job really well. As Surya was saying at another point, think of the judge like a surgeon. Now, the surgeon will come and do the most important part of the surgery. But for the surgeon to do his or her job, you need anesthesiologists, you need nursing staff, you need support staff, you need a clean environment. You need a lot more infrastructure in the hospital, such that a surgeon's time and skills can be utilized well and efficiently. And the same applies to the judiciary as well. You need good, capable, trained administrative staff, staffed to the right levels for our courts to function well. And it's also important that whoever is staffed here is given good training and orientation. While we think about the government, honestly, rule of law and justice is the highest function of the state, even more about development and other concerns that we often end up caring more about. And what this means is that the people who work in the judiciary in India at all levels need to have high qualifications, a strong public service mentality, and also a high ethos of what they're doing and why. So for more on this fascinating study, do read this report and accompanying articles in its entirety. I have included the link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for staying with us till the end. If you have any questions or comments, do write in to podcast@thinkpragati.com. And hey, if you like the podcast and listen to us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and a review. It'll mean a lot to us. The Pragati Podcast is available on the IVM Podcast app and pretty much every other podcast app and platform. We are there everywhere.
Did you know that Parsis in Mumbai, instead of being left at the Tower of Silence after they die, are now cremated? And why? Because a cow fell sick in the early 1990s. Did you know that the smog in Delhi is caused by something that farmers in Punjab do and that there's no way to stop them? Did you know that there wasn't one gas tragedy in Bhopal, but 3? One of them was seen, but 2 were unseen. Did you know that many well-intentioned government policies hurt the people they're supposed to help? Why was demonetization a bad idea? How should GST have been implemented? Why are all our politicians so corrupt when not all of them are bad people? I'm Amit Verma, and in my weekly podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, I take a shot at answering all these questions and many more. I aim to go beyond the seen and show you the unseen effects of public policy and private action. I speak to experts on economics, political philosophy, cognitive neuroscience, and constitutional law so that the insights can blow not only my mind, but also yours. The Seen and the Unseen releases every Monday. So do check out the archives and follow the show at seenunseen.in. You can also subscribe to The Seen and the Unseen on whatever podcast app you happen to prefer.
नमस्ते, मैं हूँ सौरभ चंद्रा
और मैं प्रणय कोटस्थाने।
जब महफिल खत्म होते होते दरवाजे के बाहर पुलिया के ऊपर हम दुनिया भर की जटिल समस्याओं को सॉल्व करने में लग जाते हैं तो हो जाती है पुलियाबाजी।
अब आजकल के अपार्टमेंट वालों ने तो कभी पुलिया देखी नहीं होगी, पर आप फीलिंग तो समझ ही सकते हैं।
तो आइए शामिल हो जाइए हमारी पुलियाबाजी में, जहां प्रणय और मैं एक से एक इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक्स की तह तक जाएंगे।
आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस, बिटकॉइन, पाकिस्तान, मेडिकल एजुकेशन, करेंसी क्राइसिस, कभी हम दोनों के साथ और अक्सर स्पेशल एक्सपर्ट गेस्ट की कंपनी में।
सुनिए हमें IVM की वेबसाइट, ऐप या अपने फेवरेट पॉडकास्टिंग प्लेटफॉर्म पर हर दूसरे हफ्ते।